A renewable energy conference in Las Vegas is prompting questions about America's dependence on foreign-made clean energy. So this week, thousands of green energy producers are getting together. They're descending on Vegas to show off their latest innovations, including a few companies with alleged ties to forced labor in China. Now, it's been just over a year since the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act took effect, limiting the goods China is able to sell to the United States. And joining us now are conservative commentator Carrie Sheffield and Democratic strategist Starr Hopkins. Thank you both for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having us.
Carrie, I'll start with you. I read your newest piece in Real Clear Energy, and you talk about this big gathering happening in Vegas, touting all things solar energy, but you say there's a dark side to that. Get us up to speed on what you think that dark side is.
Yeah, I do. And I see it as both a bipartisan problem and a bipartisan solution to help fix this problem. So, yes, as you mentioned, in December 2021, the Congress almost unanimously passed the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. And that act banned the use of components for anything coming from the region of China, where they have captured about, reportedly 1 million Uyghurs, Muslim Uyghurs, an ethnic minority in China, where the Chinese government is forcing them to basically do labor to produce the components that are used for many of these solar panels. And unfortunately, at this conference that you're mentioning in Vegas, this really isn't a top priority. And so a lot of these companies and their representatives who are going to be at this conference, they're kind of looking the other way, as well as some lawmakers are looking the other way. And they're excited to have, the U.S. version of these, manufacturing plants in Georgia. Senator John Ossoff is the keynote speaker at this conference. We haven't heard enough from him about how to prevent this slave labor, because they're building a factory in his backyard. And then also in Texas, Senator Ted Cruz and Governor Greg Abbott are getting a factory as well. They're not asking the right questions.
And those panels, you say, will be on full display today. Michael, do you worry about the same at this Vegas conference, that America is bringing in clean energy technology and ignoring the hands who made it?
Well, I think the U.S. always has to be careful when we're relying on foreign adversaries for new technology. That's one of the reasons why Carrie's correct. The Democrats and Republicans should be working in a bipartisan fashion to make sure that we're at the cutting edge. Whether it was the internet in the 90s, now it's new cell technology and environmentally friendly technology. We need to be ahead of that curve. That's how we create new jobs. And it's not just an economic impact, but it's a national security impact.
Yeah. And so, Michael, what would be the appropriate action and response here, not only by the Biden administration, the government, but also for this conference? I mean, should conferences like this not be held until we're sure they're not touting the product of slave labor?
Yeah, I mean, look, first I'm going to say it's always tough to push companies out when you're talking about private marketplaces. But I think when you're looking at what the government can do, I think it was smart for the Biden administration to begin its administration by pushing that act that would ban all imports from Western China, the Uyghur portion. I think it was also smart for the Biden administration during the G7 to push for G7 members to institute some sort of sanction or act against China in hopes that they could curtail some of this. But at the end of the day, this is about leadership. And we can't force our allies to do something that they don't want to do. Yeah. I'll say one of the negatives of the Trump administration was their interest in working with China in terms of, the 100 different agreements that they had for patents, the 30 that Ivanka got. I think we've got to be really careful about setting the tone. And I think here, that's where the Biden administration has to push back and set a different tone.
Carrie, what's your response to that?
Well, I would say the Trump administration actually really led the way against the forced Uyghur labor. In fact, it was then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who pushed forward for the designation of what was happening against the Uyghurs as genocide. And China hated that. So I actually applaud the Trump administration for that. I will call to task the Biden administration, because the Biden administration claims that it wants to have the U.S. be the dominant player in solar energy and renewable energy. But unfortunately, and I spoke to the governor of Alaska Alaska about this. I also spoke to the head of energy development for the state of Utah, Nevada, where this conference is being held, actually. Alaska, substantial portions of the West are owned by the federal government. I believe it's something like 60 or 80%, or majorities of these states are owned by the federal government, and yet the federal government does not allow the leasing of federal land in order to go and mine for these critical mineral components that are used for those photovoltaic screens that you're seeing on your screen there. And so it could be produced here in America, yet the Joe Biden administration fails to allow the leasing on federal land for American energy producers so that we don't have to rely on slave labor. And so these officials that I spoke with are very upset, and they feel like the Biden administration is talking out of both sides of its mouth.
Yeah. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.